and of course, you and I travel around the world, and have been into some interesting parts of the map. And of course, different cultures have different norms and values and things like that. I'm just wondering, could you touch upon a little bit about how the world of impact investing and looks in the US, maybe versus some other kind of areas in the world? That would be helpful.
No, absolutely. And I kind of want to bring it back to the other part of the first question that you ask is why aren't
Yeah.
more women businesses invested in? Because I think it goes hand in hand. So women globally, US or wherever, we we tend to run businesses in a different manner. And by that, I mean we tend to run more service businesses that don't require a lot of startup capital. We're not manufacturing widgets. That's not necessarily our sweet spot. So we do a lot of restaurants and hair salons and service businesses because they don't require a lot of capital, but they also allow us to build a business while we have competing priorities like kids and a spouse and a household. And so a service business you can fit in. We also tend to run more informal businesses, meaning we may not hire a CFO or an accountant to keep our books on day one. That might not be something that we would prioritize as an expense. And the reason that prevents women from getting capital is because the first thing an investor wants to see are your financial
Are the
statements.
numbers
Right.
right?
And so the reason I want to bring that up to answer your second question about how it plays out over different parts of the world is that I think the consistency that I see in women entrepreneurs all over the world is that we do just run different types of businesses and we run them differently. And so I think it plays out to why we're not getting capital because the system is biased towards manufacturing businesses or widget businesses or app businesses and based on the financials. And
Mm-hmm.
so what I see
And
differently, oh, go ahead.
well, I was going to say, is that true now as the world is shifting towards more of a service model? Certainly in the U.S., like we're seeing much more shift towards service industry versus manufacturing. Of course, the U.S. is very different than the rest of the world for a variety of reasons. Would you say that's true as, in other parts of the world that folks are more or women are more service industry focused? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. But, and ironically, or maybe sadly, depending on your perspective, we're seeing more service businesses getting funded globally, but we're not seeing more women getting funded. And so there's
Hmm.
still a lag there. And I'm not really sure what it's going to take to close the gap. But I do think that we're seeing some acknowledge that the gap is there and the gap is huge.
Yeah.
And that if we really want to respect women as the drivers of the economy that they can be as half the world's population, we have to figure out how to narrow that gap.
Well, let's talk about that and dive into that. So, if you were talking, as we are right now, and let's say you're meeting with a high net worth individual or a foundation or an investor or whatever, and their focus is this space we're talking about, supporting women-led companies and organizations and otherwise. What would be the first thing you would point to say, like, this is a different type of investment, this is not your typical manufacturer, or this is not like, this is not a male dominated company? How should I think differently, lending, investing, whatever, to a woman owned organization, company, whatever, versus a male led one?
That's a great
What have I
question.
got that I'm unaware of?
So let me take a step back. So first of
Yeah.
all, when we talk about gender lens investing, or GLI is the jargon, right? We There's kind of a broadly accepted I don't want to say definition because that's too rigid, but spectrum. So gender lens investing can be investing in companies that are owned or founded by women. It can be investing in companies that have women in the C-suite or on the board of directors. It can be investing in companies that produce or manufacture products or services geared towards women, like feminine hygiene products or athletic clothes for women. But it can also be companies that actively look for women in their supply chain. So there you get agricultural companies, right? or you might get a company that actively looks for women who are their cleaners or their drivers or something like that. So the definition of gender lens investing can be pretty broad. It can also be very narrow. It depends on the investor.
Okay.
So if I were
Mhm.
talking to a high net worth investor, I would first want to get a better sense for what do they mean when they say gender lens investing? But then also, what does it mean for them? Because in gender lens investing, like impact investing, we often talk about a spectrum, right? So for some
Yeah.
investors, just a company that gives women maternity leave, that's going to be gender positive enough, right? But then you've got other people who want a solid gender leading mandate, right? They want to say that I will only invest in companies for whom 50% of the employees are women, like a hard line. And so
Mhm.
if and when I talk to high net worths or investors or even foundations looking to adopt a gender lens, I need them to look inside and help me understand what do they consider gender lens investing and how much do they really want to push this? Because there's no right answer, but I think it's about finding the opportunities that fit where they are now versus where they want to be in 5 years.
Yeah, and thank you. That's great to unpack that and super helpful. In your experience, would you say most investors kind of starting out are kind of like the light touch versus, folks are more focused on like funding, C-suite, companies started by women. So there's this spectrum. Where would you say most investors are on the spectrum, and do you see them going from one end to the other? And how does that look like? Do they have like ahas, or what does that look like?
I actually see a convergence in the middle. So typically, investors will start on one end of the spectrum or the other. So if I'm
Hmm.
working with a husband and wife team, right? Or if
Yeah.
I'm working with a woman, then she might be much more assertive in what she considers gender lens investing and how much she wants to push for a social agenda. Where
Yeah.
if I'm talking to a large foundation or an institutional investor, they'll often start on the ultra, what I would consider conservative end and just want
Hmm.
to take baby steps. But I think what I do see over time is a convergence in the middle, which again reinforces this notion that I have that diversity brings about better decisions. And so if you've got women on one hand who want absolutely everything to be about gender, and you've got institutional investors who are driven by men who want to be more conservative, we meet in the middle, and I think that that's probably fair.